In the blinding heat of the North African desert, where sandstorms swallowed entire battalions, and the horizon shimmered like a mirage of doom, a small British-led force prepared to launch an operation no one believed could succeed. Outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an Italian army nearly 10 times larger, these soldiers were about to gamble everything on speed, surprise, and courage. What followed would shock the world, rewrite the early course of the Second World War, and become one of the most underrated victories in military history. This was Operation Compass. Hello and welcome to the channel. Today, we journey deep into the harsh wilderness of the North African theater, across endless dunes, abandoned forts, and dusty supply lines, to uncover how Britain pulled off a stunning upset that few remember today. Through interior moments of strategy rooms and exterior clashes under a merciless sun, we will trace how a modest, 5-day raid became a sweeping campaign that shattered an entire Italian army. The story begins in 1940, shortly after Italy entered the war. While most of Europe had fallen to the Axis and Britain stood largely alone, North Africa became a new front of both danger and opportunity. Italy controlled Libya, and its leader, Benito Mussolini, wanted quick victories to match Germany's triumphs. So, the Italian 10th Army advanced east toward Egypt, hoping to seize the Suez Canal. They pushed about 60 miles inside Egyptian territory before stopping, digging themselves into a chain of fortified camps stretching across the desert. On paper, these camps looked strong, but beneath the surface they were poorly supplied, badly coordinated, and vulnerable to a determined strike. Inside British headquarters in Cairo, General Archibald Wavell and Lieutenant General Richard O'Connor studied the situation from dimly lit rooms where maps were pinned across entire walls. They saw something the Italians could not: a chance to strike swiftly before winter ended. Though the British Western Desert Force had only about 30,000 troops, they possessed better training, superior mobility, and a secret weapon, the newly improved Matilda II infantry tank, heavily armored and capable of shrugging off most Italian guns. What the British lacked in numbers, they hoped to regain through precision, stealth, and speed. The operation, codenamed Compass, was approved as a limited raid. O'Connor intended to slip around the Italian positions in darkness, strike their weakest camp, cut their lines, and withdraw before the enemy could react. No one imagined it would evolve into a campaign. Soldiers prepared their vehicles, filled canteens, cleaned rifles, and sat silently beside engines rumbling in the night air. The desert wind carried the smell of fuel and dust as they awaited the order to advance. Just before dawn on December 9, 1940, the attack began. The British approached the Italian camps at Nibeiwa and Tumar from directions the defenders believed impassable. While sand muffled the sound of engines, infantry covered the final distance on foot. When the Matilda tanks roared forward, they smashed into the camp with unstoppable force. Italian positions collapsed within hours. Many defenders froze in shock, unable to penetrate the tank's thick armor. Those who resisted were overwhelmed by coordinated artillery and infantry assaults. The victory at Nibeiwa triggered a chain reaction. O'Connor pressed on, capturing camp after camp. The British moved with astonishing precision, navigating dunes, bypassing strongpoints, and striking from unexpected angles. The Italians, scattered and confused, struggled to communicate as their lines broke apart. But Operation Compass was only beginning to reveal its full potential. As the British forces advanced deeper, they discovered weaknesses far greater than anticipated, and realized the desert might allow them to do more than simply raid. With the early Italian camps destroyed, O'Connor made a bold decision. Instead of pulling back as originally ordered, he pushed forward, exploiting the collapsing Italian morale. Scouts reported that enemy units were retreating in disarray, leaving behind supplies, artillery, and vehicles. The British saw an opportunity too valuable to ignore. What had started as a cautious strike now transformed into a sweeping offensive across hundreds of miles. As columns of trucks and tanks surged westward, the North African landscape stretched endlessly around them, miles of barren sand interrupted by rocky plateaus and abandoned outposts. At night, soldiers rested beneath cold, star-filled skies, their fires flickering against canvas tents. Inside cramped command trucks, officers traced Italian withdrawal routes with pencils and compass rulers, planning moves with rapid precision. Every hour mattered. The next major objective was the fortified port of Bardia, just across the Libyan border. Italian troops had dug deep trenches, built bunkers, and mounted heavy guns, but they were demoralized, short of food, and desperate. When the British attacked on January 3, 1941, Matilda tanks again proved decisive, breaking through defenses while Australian infantry stormed trenches and strongpoints. The fighting was brutal. Sand mixed with smoke as explosions echoed off the cliffs, but by January 5, Bardia fell. Tens of thousands of Italian soldiers surrendered. The momentum continued. The British advanced to Tobruk, another major port bristling with artillery and fortifications. Yet the Italian resolve was crumbling rapidly. Many units were exhausted from weeks of retreat, unsure where their commanders were, and overwhelmed by the speed of the British advance. After a coordinated assault on January 21, Tobruk also surrendered. The British captured huge stores of supplies, tanks, and ammunition, welcoming resources in a campaign fought across a vast, unforgiving desert. Interior scenes inside British HQ revealed growing astonishment. A 5-day raid had turned into one of the most successful operations of the war, and the enemy seemed unable to stop it. O'Connor, calm and analytical, drove his forces deeper toward Derna and Machili, aiming to cut off the Italian 10th Army completely. Meanwhile, Italian columns fleeing west formed desperate convoys along narrow desert tracks. From the air, British reconnaissance aircraft spotted these movements, guiding ground forces to intercept them. The desert became a battleground of speed. Armored cars racing across open, artillery duels silhouetted against the setting sun, and dust clouds rising behind every maneuver. By early February, the Italians were streaming toward their final fallback position, Beda Fomm, a narrow coastal strip where the desert pressed close to the sea. If they could pass through this choke point, many thousands might escape, but O'Connor devised a daring plan. He sent a fast, flying column across the desert to block the route, cutting off the escape before the Italians arrived. This flying column, known as Combo Force, pushed across rough terrain at high speed, driving through night and day. Soldiers gripped truck frames to stay upright, sand lashing their faces as engines strained. When they reached the road south of Beda Fomm, they quickly set up roadblocks and anti-tank guns. Moments later, the first Italian convoys appeared, surprised to find the British already waiting. What followed was a chaotic and intense series of clashes. Italian tanks tried to break through, but British gunners held their ground, firing until barrels glowed red. Armored cars darted between dunes, cutting off flanking attempts. The Italians launched repeated assaults, but the choke point held firm. The desert thundered with explosions as columns backed up for miles. Operation Compass was racing toward its decisive moment. As dawn broke over Beda Fomm, the final act of the campaign unfolded. Thousands of Italian troops, vehicles, and equipment packed the narrow road, desperate to break out. But British positions were now firmly entrenched, supported by artillery and mobile armor. The Italians launched one last major attack, sending their remaining tanks forward in a determined push. Dust clouds rose behind them as engines roared. British anti-tank crews waited in silence inside shallow desert pits. When the Italians came within range, the entire line erupted. Shells slammed into the advancing tanks, knocking out many and forcing the rest to scatter. Infantry units moved swiftly between positions, guiding fire and reinforcing weak spots. The fighting became close and fierce, with gunfire echoing across the sands. Throughout the day, the Italians attempted multiple breakthroughs, but each attack faltered. Their chain of command had broken down. Ammunition was running low, and vehicles were running out of fuel. Meanwhile, British reinforcements began to arrive, tightening the noose. The desert, once a vast open space, had become a deadly trap. Inside the Italian headquarters, confusion reigned. Officers argued about surrender while exhausted soldiers waited for orders that never came. Radios crackled with fragments of messages, but there was no clear direction. By the evening of February 7, 1921, the Italian 10th Army, over 130,000 men, began surrendering in groups. Trucks rolled forward carrying white flags made from shirts and blankets. The British, dusty and worn from weeks of non-stop fighting, watched as thousands of prisoners marched past. The scale of the victory was staggering: more than a dozen divisions destroyed, over 100 tanks captured, and vast stores of weapons seized. Operation Compass had achieved results far beyond anything imagined. A force of about 30,000 had effectively dismantled an army 4 times its size. Exterior scenes across the desert in the aftermath were haunting. Burned-out vehicles dotted the landscape. Abandoned artillery pieces sank halfway into the sand. Tents fluttered in the wind near empty trenches. The battleground felt both silent and immense, as if the desert had swallowed the conflict and left only traces behind. Inside British command rooms, officers congratulated O'Connor, whose strategic brilliance had shaped the entire campaign. Yet even in victory, there was a sense of looming uncertainty. Intelligence reports indicated that Germany was preparing to intervene. Soon, the Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel would arrive, bringing new challenges and turning the North African War into one of the most fiercely contested campaigns of the conflict. Still, nothing could diminish what Operation Compass had achieved. It was Britain's first major land victory of the Second World War, a stunning demonstration of tactical innovation, armored warfare, and daring leadership. It provided a morale boost at a time when Britain desperately needed hope, showing that the Axis powers were far from invincible. As night settled over the desert, British soldiers gathered around vehicles and ration tins, speaking quietly about the battles they had survived. Some wrote letters home, describing the endless dunes, the harsh sun, and the unexpected triumph they had delivered. Others simply lay back in the cool sand, staring at the stars that had guided them through countless night marches. In many ways, Operation Compass became a forgotten victory, overshadowed by the arrival of Rommel, later battles like El Alamein, and the long grind of the Desert War. But for those who fought, it remained a testament to what determination, mobility, and precise planning could accomplish against overwhelming odds. Today, when we look back at the early years of World War II, this campaign stands as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and strategy can rewrite the course of history. The British Western Desert Force, through audacity and relentless drive, achieved what few thought possible. Operation Compass was not just a military success, it was a symbol of resilience. And as the desert winds continue to sweep across the old battlefields of Libya and Egypt, they carry with them the echoes of a forgotten triumph, a victory that deserves to be remembered and honored. Adausen Zauhonatzen aus Iya Iga Awa.